This video is not meant as a beginner tutorial for Blender Grease Pencil. It's really meant to just give you a glimpse into the workflow behind making 2D animation in Blender Grease Pencil. The biggest headache first and foremost is that Blender is at its heart a 3D program. Even though you're using it for 2D and 2D animation, it's all based on the premise and logic and idea of 3D spatial awareness, so I gotta keep that in mind while I set up my scene. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to emulate a 3-button mouse by going into the preferences. This allows me to navigate the 3D space while using my drawing tablet. Next, I'm going to want to go to my preferences, click on Add-on and search Grease, and click on the Grease object. Scroll down to Rotate Canvas. This allows me to rotate the canvas while I'm drawing, which is really helpful. Next, I'm going to preemptively set up a few objects. Objects are basically boxes that contain a bunch of layers and drawings. I delete the default layers they have set up for me, and I make 6 new ones: rough, fill, eyes, line, mouth, and secondary. This is just my personal preference. Then I go into my materials panel, delete the default ones, and then set up the new ones that I think I'm going to need throughout my project. As my project evolves, I might need new materials, but for now, these are the ones I think I'll need. Now this part really confused me when I first started off. If you go into your layers panel and go down to stroke depth order, it's automatically set to 2D layers. If you're dealing with only one object, that means whatever the top layer is will be drawn over whatever the layers below it are, just like Photoshop or any other 2D software. But if you're dealing with multiple objects, which you're almost always going to be, you're going to want to switch this to 3D location. This will allow you to move your objects between each other in a 3D space. This is how I arranged my pews in the church scene. Let's create a little guy jumping, and I'm going to go through some tips and tricks. I'm going to draw 2 frames, the setup and then the payoff. It's good to add anticipation before any sort of big movement, so before he launches into the air, I'm going to use the sculpt tool to have him crouch down a tiny bit further before he springs up. I'm going to duplicate the frame of him in the air, use the sculpt tool, and stretch him out to make the motion a little more smooth. The sculpt tool is really good for small tweaks like this, but eventually, if I want my animation to be dynamic and interesting to look at, I can't be afraid to draw new poses. Look at him go. I'm going to add some secondary animation of some dust poofing out to add more impact when he lands. I'll also add some wind for when he jumps up. I'm going to go ahead and color him in. I switch to my paint bucket tool, select my material, and I start coloring. I can color in each body part, but sometimes there's little spots that get sectioned off. Instead, I'll switch it to negative and click on the outside of what I want filled in, and it'll fill in the whole thing. Much easier. Thanks to Blender, there's some bells and whistles I can add to enhance my animation, including modifiers. If I add the noise modifier, it can make it look like I'm redrawing my character every 2 frames. I can also go into the special effects and add a rim effect. This will automatically add a highlight to my drawings, and it works pretty well. Let's draw some quick backgrounds. There we go, this looks pretty neat. I like this guy. A couple little tips and tricks is, if you want to draw perspective, go to Guide, click on Radial, and draw from the outside towards the point, and keep going until you got all the perspective lines you want. If you want to do 2-point perspective, just take the grid you already have, Shift-D, duplicate, and drag it over here. If someone knows a better way to do perspective, let me know. Blender is an insanely powerful program, and there's a lot of features that I don't even use yet, like shaders and emitters. If you've never used Blender before, the learning curve is pretty intense. It's a whole different language, but it's free and powerful. I think the most important thing to remember is that with 2D animation, the number one thing is just patience and time. No matter what program you're using, there is no button that does all the work for you. You're still going to have to get in there and draw a bunch and draw a bunch of different poses and just keep drawing and draw again. Blender has some really cool features like the sculpt tool, modifiers, and special effects. And the fact that you're in a 3D space creates some really cool and insane opportunities, but it still just takes a lot of work.